She survived horrendous domestic violence. Her ex tried to murder her, but there's so much more, including multiple wives. And she's here to tell her story on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. If you want to be a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, simply contact us. It couldn't be easier. You can send us a message on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show page, or email jay@letradio.com. That's JAY at letradio.com. Contact us from the great state of New Jersey, state I was born in. We have Kelly Sutliff on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Kelly is a survivor of tremendous domestic violence. When I say survivor, that means, in my book, there are people that they go through this stuff and don't find a life afterwards. She's got a great life afterwards, and that's where the real work comes into play, and she'll talk about some of that. She's also a big dog person. Her website is kellyscanines.org. kellyscanines.org, and that's spelled KELLYS, K9S.org. Kelly, thanks for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Talking about this, both very much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to be here, and I appreciate it immensely. So, as you said, yes, I am a survivor of domestic violence, and in this incident, my ex did try to take my life from me. But I do think it's important to kind of give you some background about where I was emotionally when I first met my ex, because I do think that abusers and predators, they really seek out individuals who have some sort of vulnerability. They do.
And quite honestly, and I'm not saying this to be sexist, they find certain women, and serial killers are a great example. They find certain women, and they look for women, all predators, including lions, for example. They look on the weakest, the oldest, the sickest, the most infirmed. They look because an injury for them is life-threatening. Human predators are no different.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. And it doesn't even matter what that vulnerability is. So, for example, I met my ex in August of 2019. However, before that, I was really kind of in emotional turmoil from losing both my parents fairly young. I lost my mother, who was my best friend, from pancreatic cancer in August of 2013. And then 4 years later, I lost my father to a very rare cancer in March of 2017. And losing both of them was really, really tough for me. I have a very small family, and to be honest with you, a lot of us aren't even speaking, so that makes the family even smaller. And I was really their primary caretakers, so taking them to doctor's appointments, really spending a lot of their time and my time, caring for them. So losing them was really rough. And at the same time, I had been a crisis counselor. I'm a psychotherapist by trade. So that has been my career for a very long time. We're going on over 20 years now. And at the time, I was working as a crisis counselor in a high school. And in 2018, they did something that I did not agree with. I felt like they violated the rights of one of my students. So I stood up for that student, and in retribution for that, they kind of came down on me with the hammer. So I ended up leaving that job. So I was also in this career transition into going into full-time private practice. So when I met my ex, I thought I was in a good place emotionally, but I have to be honest with you, John, now looking back on it, I really didn't heal from both my parents' deaths and what I was going through in my career. I also, at the time, meeting him, I was in recovery. I was about a year and a half out of recovery for a very severe eating disorder that I really developed when my mother...
I'll be honest with you, I don't understand them at all. I'm a recovery, and I've been sober now 35 years. So I try to equate everything that way. It was a big change. But I want to ask you this because I think it's important, and I think you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. You're not doing the coulda, shoulda, wouldas, and in hindsight, it's 2020. By the way,
right?
You're not doing the coulda, shoulda, wouldas. You're not, and I hate when other people do this. They do victim blaming, but when the victim blames himself, then I really take exception to that.
Right, and I'm not blaming myself. I just think it's important in my own healing, and we'll get to that. It was important for me to recognize what about me left me vulnerable to someone like my ex. And in order to get to where I am today in my own healing journey, and I have to be honest with you, and I was going to say this later, but I'll say it now, I don't think we're ever truly completely healed.
Never.
I think healing is a constant process. So I'm still healing today.
And then, by the way, it's not linear. It doesn't go in a straight line. Recovery of any type doesn't. You got to have 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back.
100%. And you know that being in recovery yourself. So I think it's important for my own healing journey and for other people's as well, as a psychotherapist, to be able to recognize what are the things I have to work on to better protect and heal myself in the future. So that's why I bring these things up as to why I feel like, I was in a vulnerable situation when I met my ex.
I'm glad you said that, too, because to be honest, and one of the hardest things I had to do, and this was, I'd say, about 4 years into my recovery journey, was I had someone, a sponsor, said, okay, I want you to write down every relationship you've been in your adult life and what was the common denominator. And that took me about 3 days. I was like, oh, they're all petite. And he said, no, I don't think that's it. They're all blonde. No, I don't think that's it. And then I realized it was me. I was the same person in every relationship, and they all ended badly.
Right, and that totally makes sense. So that gives you a little bit background of where I was at the time. So I met my ex in August of 2018. And, I've said this publicly before, it was a very fast-moving relationship, which I do take some responsibility and blame for because I allowed it to move at that pace, even though he was pushing the relationship along. So we met in August of 2018. By November of 2018, he was living with me. By December of 2018, we were engaged. And then by January of 2019, we got married in what was kind of like a secret ceremony because we were planning on having more of a public wedding in August of 2019 in Hawaii. So we did the ceremony in January so that some of my very close friends and his mother and his son could be there. But that was really kept a secret. And then when we went to Hawaii in April of 2019, that's when we eloped in Hawaii, and we kind of publicized it by posting on social media and really announcing that we were married. We'll take a short break,
and we'll turn to a conversation in a few moments with Kelly Sutliff. She survived horrendous domestic violence, which we'll talk about in a few moments, built a great life afterwards. And her website, you want to get more details about her and what she does, kellyscanines.org. That's kellyscanines.org. It's about dogs, which we'll talk about later on. Of all the radio stations in the United States, there are no other shows like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And on Facebook, there's only one official page. Do a search on Facebook for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure to like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. This Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Someone asked, what's the catch? What's the cost? There is no cost for anything on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast website. letradio.com. letradio.com. Again, that's letradio.com.
Current conversation with Kelly Sutliff, contacts from New Jersey. By the way, I was born in New Jersey. My family's from New Jersey. I was born in Passaic, New Jersey, a long, long time ago. As a Korean Navy brat, we didn't live there very long. So every time I go back there and visit family, it's like old home week. She survived domestic violence, tremendous domestic violence, which we'll talk about in a few moments, and she has a great life today. Her website, I'll give you a hint, she's really big into dogs, kellyscanines.org. That's kellyscanines.org. Before we went to break, Kelly, you started talking about you moved faster than you thought maybe was appropriate for the relationship, but I think that's neither here nor there. But when did the signs first start showing up for you that things were not right?
Yeah, so, this is really the crazy thing. I have to say that if you would have asked me up until the night that my ex tried to take my life from me, if there was any major red flags, I would have told you no. And I still to this day would tell you no. There were maybe some pink flags, but they could easily be rationalized away, either by him or by me. My ex was the nicest guy in the world up until December 16th, 2019, which is the day he tried to kill me. I would have told you that I had the best husband in the world. And that morning, it was really, really early in the morning. My dog that I had at the time, Chester, he got me up really early, which was out of the ordinary. So I get up, I take him out to the bathroom, I come back in, and the way my ex fell asleep with his phone just looked funny to me. And my gut kicked in and said, look in his phone, look in his phone. And I had never looked in his phone before, other than one time to see something that he took a picture of that he wanted me to buy. So I grabbed his phone from him, and when my ex slept, there was zero waking him up. He slept really, really deep. So I opened his phone, and in his phone, I found all of these horrific messages with another woman that were incredibly explicit, but also very demeaning to me. And before I became a member of the true crime community, I was always into true crime, and my thought was, I don't know who I'm married to, because my husband would never do this.
Isn't that a name of a TV show? Who the heck did I marry? Something like that?
Yes. And that could be, I was actually on a TV show. It's called Toxic. It was episode 1, Sleeping with a Stranger. You can stream it on HBO Max or Hulu, but I could also be on that TV show as well, because you're right. In that moment, I'm thinking to myself, who the heck did I marry? And that was when I realized, this is not a good situation. At the time, I still wasn't thinking that he'd hurt me or even hurt himself, because he'd never laid a hand on me, nor made any kind of threat towards himself. So I woke him up.
He was caught.
Correct. Red-handed.
And sometimes these people can become, I'd say, very violent when they're cornered.
Right. And here's the thing. The most dangerous time for a victim of a domestic violence relationship to be murdered by their significant other is when they're leaving. Uh-huh. The thing is, I didn't know I was in an abusive relationship until it became abusive. So I wake him up, and, we're kind of going back and forth all day. And I'm really saying to him, I can't believe you do this to me. He's constantly asking me if I'm going to leave him. At that time, I didn't know. And by the, later on that day, I really made the decision that I was going to leave him. So when he asked me that final time, I looked at him and I said, yeah, I cannot be married to you. And I have to be honest with you, John, I think it was in that moment that I really signed my death warrant, because that's when the physical abuse occurred. And for 45 minutes, my ex physically assaulted me while simultaneously doing $63,000 of damage to my home in 45 minutes. And in that incident, my ex threw my head through a sheetrock wall, causing me to lose consciousness, threw me into the bedside table where I once again lost consciousness, strangled me 3 separate times that evening, held a military knife to my throat, and pried my mouth open and tried to get me to swallow a bottle of Xanax to commit suicide. And there was one point during that struggle where I couldn't find any phone. And I knew I had to get out of the house to call 911 because I knew he was going to kill me. You know, he told me one time when he was strangling me that he was going to have me watch him destroy my home, and then he was going to kill me. So I knew I had to get out of the house.
Heck yeah.
Even from...
Hey,
yeah.
Look, by the way, you're doing a great job explaining this, but I tell people when life-threatening situations occur to me, like, for example, with the last end of my police career, I had a thought come to mind, and it wasn't clear, like I'm saying, but I thought to myself, this guy's trying to kill me, I'm going to die, but it's not going to be tonight. It won't be because of that. What that guy does. If I needed to, I'd eat his eyeballs out to survive.
Right. And, you know, it's interesting you say that because there was one point, you know, the third time that my ex was strangling me, he could see that I was trying to say something. And obviously my airway was blocked. I could barely breathe. I couldn't speak. So he lifted up his forearm and said, okay, what are you trying to say? And in that moment, and that's my one regret that I still have till this day. In that moment, I looked at him and I just said, just kill me already. And he laughed and he put his forearm back across my throat and he said, not yet. You're going to watch me destroy your house first. And I don't know what it was, but when he said that, that just kind of lit a fire in me. And then I was like, oh no, I'm not going down without a fight. And then I could hear him. He got off of me. He was destroying my kitchen, and I could hear him in the kitchen, and I knew that that was my only time that I'd be able to get out of the house without him knowing. So I found my dog. I hid my dog in the basement, and I took off out the front door. And actually, if you go to my social media and whatnot, you'll see all video footage of this from the Ring videos. And I run to my neighbors. And while I was at my neighbor's house, I could look into my own house, and in my bay window, I saw my ex start going towards the basement, and that's where I hid my dog. And before I tell you this next part of the story, I want to preface this with that I am not ever advocating for someone to run back into a dangerous situation. But I don't have human children, so my dogs are like my children.
Oh, look, I get
and
that.
In that moment, I knew that my ex, he thought I was hiding in the basement. If he realized that I wasn't down there, he would kill Chester. And I was going to be darned if he laid a hand on my dog. So I made a split-second decision to run back into the house to save my dog. That dog saved my life multiple times since I had him, and I was going to repay him that favor. So I ran back in, and it really was, you know, whether or not people believe in spirituality or whatnot, but it was such divine timing. I really think I had some help
I
from
agree
the other side.
with that. We'll take a short break on that note, and we'll turn that conversation in a few moments. So we're talking with Kelly Sutliff. She survived tremendous domestic violence, which she's talking about. She'll continue to talk about it. She is big into dogs. Her website, get more details about her, kellyscanines.org. It's KELLYSK, the number 9s.org. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We are going to take a short break. I promise you. We'll be right back.
Be sure to subscribe to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on YouTube.com. Like everything they do, it is free, where you'll find great police videos and episodes of the podcast after they air on radio. Look for and subscribe to Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on YouTube. Best of all, it is free.
Current conversation with Kelly Sutliff on Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Kelly's contacts from New Jersey. She survived tremendous domestic violence, which she's returned to the conversation in a few moments. Got me on the edge of my seat. And she's big on dogs. There's no way to put it. And so am I. By the way, my wife is much bigger at dogs than I am. Her website is kellyscanines.org. That's KELLYS, the number 9s.org. Kelly, before we went to break, you were talking about going back in the house to rescue your dog, and you started mentioning divine intervention. There's a lot of things I believe in that I don't talk about, but there's moments I can look back and say, there's a reason why I'm still walking and talking. Can you continue on with that part of the story?
Absolutely. So when I say divine intervention, when I ran out of the house to my neighbors, even before running back in, the way the door closed, and you see it in the Ring video, it was so quiet. If it was any louder, my ex would have known I got out of the house. And then, it would have been probably even worse than the situation was. And when I ran back in, the door again closed so softly. And it was perfect timing where my ex was going down into the basement, and my smart dog must have sat at the top step of the basement. So when my ex opened the door, my dog ran out. And as I was running in the front door, I grabbed my dog. I called for him. I grabbed him. I put him into the office. And then I pushed the basement door shut and really kind of barricaded it with my body. And I turned my head to the right, and all I saw was a flashlight, and I knew it was the police. So that's what I mean by divine intervention.
How did the police get involved? Because you didn't mention calling. You called them.
Well, I tried. Every time I had the phone, that's when my ex would strangle me. And then it got to the point where I couldn't find a phone. What I didn't know then that I know now is that one of my 911 calls actually did go through. There's a recording of it that you can hear on the TV show where actually my ex intercepts that call, and he says to the 911 operator, "Everything is fine. We're sorry." And you hear me screaming in the background. So that's how the police got there so fast, because that operator sent the police out.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of people don't realize that our department back in the 80s, we investigated every call. So even if it was a 911 hang up and it was accidental call, we went because of this serious scenario.
They wouldn't have gotten there that fast if that 911 operator did not send them, even though my neighbors did call when I got to my neighbor's house before I ran back into my house to save Chester. So it was such perfect timing, because I was told that when the police came in and they opened up the basement door, my ex was halfway up the stairs with a knife. And, I'm tiny, and my ex he's a bigger guy. There would be no way that I could have held that door against him. So, if the timing wasn't the way it was, and that's why I say it was just divine timing and divine intervention, I don't think I'd be here today.
Yeah, I don't think you would either. I'm really glad you are. I've got to ask you this, and I really do not want to dwell on him because, look, be honest with you, he's a problem. But it's part of your story. I think what's the most powerful part is what you did the during, obviously, but afterwards. So, and I want to add this very quickly. My wife and I, we've been married almost 30 years now. We've been together a long time, and we're doing very, very well. But she has carte blanche. She knows my password. She can get on my phone anytime she wants. I got nothing to hide. Same with her. We don't do that, but the invitation's been out there. There's nothing to hide. I don't do things that even going to raise red flags for potential.
Right. Right. And the crazy thing is, John, too, he had my passwords, which I think there was an alternative reason he wanted my stuff, but I had his. So he made it seem like I could trust him. I also think it's important to mention the night that the domestic violence happened was really just the tip of the iceberg. What came after that was just as traumatic, dealing with stalking, both physically stalking and online, as well as harassment, from my ex's lawyers, through the family courts and criminal justice system. And it really, the stalking got so bad. And the police, everyone knew that he was stalking me, but everyone kept saying, we just can't prove it without a reasonable doubt. The police had deer cameras up at my house. It's, stalking is really a difficult thing to prove. And sadly, my ex used the system against me. And, this is a whole other story, but I'll just mention it because I think it's important to explain why I got into protection dogs. A month and a half after the incident, my ex went to court to basically tell on me and say, hey, Kelly has a high-capacity magazine. Mind you, my ex is supposed to discard of that magazine when it was outlawed in New Jersey and never did, so he really kind of set me up. So the state came in and took away my gun. I am the first domestic violence victim in the state of New Jersey to have their gun taken from me. And it was really after that incident and then the stalking where I felt so defenseless and out of control and completely powerless. And that went on for months. And there was really one day where I woke up and I looked at myself in the mirror and I said to myself, even though my ex isn't physically in my life anymore, I'm still allowing him to control my life because, I lived and breathed this situation and it was killing me. He was killing me without having to physically touch me.
That's the thing that I struggle with, and I've gotten much, much, much better. But look, someone broke it down and said, you can only be victimized once by a person. After that, every time is done by you, unless it's a situation's repeat. But that's what that person did to me over and over and over again. And it was my resentments, all that stuff that poisoned me, not them. They were totally unaware of what was happening.
Right. Exactly. And it was in that moment that I really didn't even recognize the woman I was staring back at. And it was then I was like, no, I've got to take some power and control back. And that was when, even though I was going to counseling, it was COVID at the time. So I was doing 2 to 3 days a week of intensive therapy with a therapist, Zoom, and in the office when I could. And, that's when a friend said to me, I think you need a protection dog.
Oh, by the way, don't even get me started. Guess what breed of dog we have?
What kind?
Rottweiler.
Oh, I grew up with Rottweiler.
And my neighbor says to me, to my wife the other day, she said, is he a service dog for your husband? She goes, yes, he is. He came to us all. We've had 13. He's our 13th Rottweiler, the best dog we've ever had. The main thing he does for me is I can sleep at night because I don't have to worry. Yeah. He's not an aggressive dog. He doesn't react to people unless they mean him harm or mean us harm. He doesn't react to other dogs. He doesn't do any of that stuff. He's great with our cats, all that stuff. But, man, what he does for me is priceless.
Yeah, 100%. So when a friend said that to me, I was ignorant and I didn't realize that, quote unquote, normal people could have trained protection dogs. I thought it was just military and police. So I started doing some research. And I found a gentleman, a trainer and a breeder by the name of Bobby Gurla up in Randolph, New Jersey from Metro Canine Academy. And I figured, let me give him a call and see if my situation is something that I need a dog for. So I talked to him. I actually sent him a video of what my house looked like. And he called me back and he was like, listen, I don't know you, but this is the worst crime scene I've ever seen in my entire life. Yes, you need a dog, and you need a dog like tomorrow. Yeah. So can you please come up? So I went up, and that is where I met my first protection dog. She is recently, so if I get emotional, I apologize.
I'll return that conversation in a few moments because these dogs hold a special place in my heart as well. We're talking about Kelly Sutliff. She survived tremendous domestic violence, and when I say survived, she's built a great life afterwards. We'll return that conversation in a few moments. Her website, if you want to get more details about her and what she does, her mission, kellyscanines.org. That's KELLYS, the number 9S.org. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Be sure to download the free Clubhouse app. It's like having your own talk radio station on your phone. And best of all, it is free. Be sure to follow John J. Wiley at LET Radio Show and look for major announcements. That's right, the Clubhouse app is free, and be sure to follow him for major announcements. That's John J. Wiley or at LET Radio Show. Did I mention that it is free?
Turn our conversation with Kelly Sutliff on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. She is a survivor of tremendous domestic violence. Her ex tried to murder her. He strangled her, assaulted her, held a knife through her throat, did a lot of damage to the house, stalked her, all that stuff. Here's the caveat. She found out he had a bunch of ex-wives and he had physically assaulted all of them. And she's talking about her journey to freedom. Her website is kellyscanines.org. That's KELLYSK, the number 9S.org. And I'll tell you what that's about in a few moments. For when the right, Kelly, you talked about getting this protection dog. Did that make a big difference in your life and your recovery?
It was the turning point for me. I feel like it breathed life into me again. If it wasn't for my first protection dog, Stella, I have to be honest with you, I'm not sure I'd be here today, to be honest with you. When Chester passed, if I didn't have Stella and have the passion that she gave me for training protection dogs and for living life, ultimately, I don't know if I would be here today. The way I always describe it is, I woke up every morning and lived for my dogs until I became my own reason to live again. And
they will do that for you without a doubt.
Absolutely, because not only are these dogs trained to physically protect you, and it's a little bit what you were talking about before, they're emotionally healing as well. So I bring Stella home, and the way I knew that Stella was my dog is when the first time I met her, she sat down next to me, and a stranger started to approach us, and she just leaned against my leg and put her paw over me, as if she was saying, "I got you," because It's like she felt my nerves. And it was in that moment that I was like, this is my dog. I get goosebumps just talking about it now.
Well, you're preaching to the choir here because this dog, and his name is Enoch, by the way, he does so much for me, and my wife as well. But the main thing is he's not a mean dog. He's not aggressive at all. But if you have bad intentions, you're not coming in that house. Just looking at him, you're like, oh, no. He's a big male, and he's not going to give in.
Right, exactly. And protection dogs, trained protection dogs, as you know from being in law enforcement, they're not aggressive. They're actually very social, but on command. So that's a common misconception of trained protection dogs. We can't actually use an aggressive dog. These dogs are very obedient. They're very highly trained, and they have great relationships with their handlers. But, bringing Stella home, she gave me not only a passion for living life, but I laughed again. I smiled. I got so involved with the training that it became my reason why. And I eventually got another dog, Luca, who I started to compete with in Schutzen or IGP competitions. And then after that was when I decided I was at my own place healing. My ex had pled guilty. He didn't serve a day in jail. He got 3 years probation, but he pled guilty to aggravated assault by strangulation, criminal mischief, and possession of a deadly weapon. And then in October of 2022, and then in October of 2023, he finally agreed to divorce me. He dragged that out. And it was after that, and after filming Toxic, that I was like, I'm ready. I'm ready to be able to give back to other survivors what Stella has done for me. And that is how Kelly's Canines Tales of Courage was born.
We're going to talk about that in a moment. I got to ask you this question. When did you find out that he had multiple ex-wives?
So I actually found that out pretty early on. I knew that he had 2 prior to me. I found out about the first one through my private investigator that I hired. When this first happened, I hired a private investigator because I needed to know who I was dealing with. And he got me in touch with all of the exes. And, all of the exes confirmed to me that they were abused by in one way or the other, not necessarily all physically, but emotionally and whatnot. The third ex-wife, has the most similar story to myself, but, my ex is really smart. You know, he picks people that he doesn't think will report, and with good reason, they didn't. So, you know, I really thought my ex felt like I wouldn't report either, but, you know, I think I'm
glad you did, Kelly. I'm really glad that we're having this conversation, because a lot of people realize, and I got to ask you this will be a very short answer because we're running short on time. To get from point A to point B to where you're at today, I'm sure it took a lot of work and a lot of life-changing decisions on your part.
Oh, absolutely. It took a lot of therapy, but it also took a lot of mental clarity of, I'm not going to let this defeat me. Like, moving through the bad times, knowing that there is going to come a day where I'm going to come out on top of this. And I really held on to that. And you know what? I'm a very resilient person. You know, I've been through a lot in my life, and I was going to be darned if I was going to let my ex be the end of me.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And because one of the most frustrating things we had as a police officer is when we had repeat calls for domestic violence, and it's the same people and they never left. I understand it, but there's only so much we could do.
Right. Exactly. And, you know, I am one of the rarities. I left the first time, but it does on average take a victim 6 or 7 times before they officially leave. And I also want to say that, you know, I was lucky. I had the financial means to support myself and to really fight my ex. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't have that. And a lot of people don't have the funds to afford a protection dog. Stella, it was really expensive.
Not cheap.
So that's why I decided that's what Kelly's Canines is going to do, and that's where we provide fully trained protection dogs to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault.
Well, I want you to elaborate on that. And here's, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the dogs are bred for a certain reason, and they take 1, sometimes 2 years of training, and people have to eat. So there is an expense involved with obtaining these dogs.
Yes. So we do this in 2 ways. So the first pathway to a survivor getting a trained protection dog is we provide the dog, which really starts by breeding. You know, we use Bobby, and we hope to expand to other states in the future, so we will use other trainers and breeders. But right now here in New Jersey, we use Bobby Gurla of Metro Canine Academy, and he pairs up a breeding for a specific purpose, for the genetics of the dog that he knows he's breeding that have a history of doing bite work, being protection dogs, competing and whatnot, have, you know, stability and are social. So it really starts from then, and it is a 2-year process of training. So when we're giving a survivor of a dog, they're getting a dog that's 1.5 years, 2 years old, that's fully trained. And one of our protection dogs that we give to a survivor costs $40,000.
I was going to ask you what the price was, but there's no expense to them.
No, the nonprofit pays for that. That's why, you know, we fully rely on very generous donations in order to do this work. Then we also recently, in January of 2026, added a new pathway to get a protection dog. What we realized, we officially launched in October of 2024. So our first year of operating, we realized there's a lot of survivors that have their own dogs as well as got a dog because of their domestic violence situation. So now what we also do, in addition to providing a trained protection dog, is if a survivor has their own dog, we will evaluate the dog with our trainer to see if it has some of the characteristics of a protection dog that can be trained. And if our trainers feel like, yeah, this dog's got the characteristics, we can train them in protection work, the nonprofit will pay for that training, which is about 24 sessions to start, which costs about $10,000. And the nonprofit will pay. No, it's not.
I got to ask you this, because we're almost out of time. Almost every nonprofit I've talked to said fundraising is like the other F word. Is that difficult for you?
Oh, my God. Oh, my gosh. Yes. Yes. Listen, I am not looking for application. I mean, please apply. I encourage all survivors to apply.
Just go to the website, kellyscanines.org, and here's what I suggest people do. Number one, if all you can donate is $5, do that. If you're a big corporation, you can do sponsorship. Do that as well. That's kellyscanines.org, spelled KELLYSK, 9s.org. Kelly, thanks for your story, and thanks for telling us all about it on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, and for all you do is very much appreciated.
Thank you for having me. I so appreciate you taking the time to hear my story and what I've done with the broken pieces.
You can find us on Facebook. Just search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and be sure to click like. I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or two or three. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and Podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.